right? People want to see things happening. And so as you're working on these things and you find opportunities to do the kind of thing that's coming forward with this proposal, bring them, and so they can be assessed. And sometimes the answer will be yes, and occasionally it'll be no, but just keep working with us in that way. Because we view you more than just a vendor. We view you as a partner in getting the work done broadly. So congratulations on already taking the initiative.
Yeah, so thank you guys for being here, and I'm just encouraged and excited about not only that HB 2017 is really a catalyst to a lot more things to come, I would assume even beyond that 10-year period as you just indicated. But I'm just excited about the opportunity that we as a state agency are using local tax dollars to support, grow, and sustain local businesses. And that's really important to me as somebody in this role and somebody who's very closely affiliated with that particular industry. So, because I know that the construction industry is a vital piece to middle-income jobs and opportunities for folks to work their ways up and benefit off their tax dollar. So. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Director?
Chairman, first, gentlemen, thank you for coming down today and sharing your thoughts. It does culminate a conversation that played itself out yesterday with regard to this request and approval contingent on this conversation, to be very honest with you. I don't think there's anyone in this room that that doesn't understand the great confidence that the legislature showed in this agency, in the construction industry, when they passed House Bill 2017. I think in turn, the confidence that the Commission has showed in this agency and the industry to deliver this project and the other projects within the portfolio here. It's our obligation to repay that confidence by delivering these projects on time, on budget, with safety first focus. Because recall, we're going to have about 165,000 supervisors each and every day moving up and down I-5 there, watching what we do. So I appreciate the commitment for this project, the commitment to all the projects that will play themselves out over the course of time here. Let's rebuild Oregon's infrastructure and make it a little bit better and make it safer for folks traveling up and down the I-5 corridor. So thank you for being here, gentlemen.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much.
With that, based on our order today, I believe we're going to move into item O, State Transportation Improvement Fund. And sorry, we have to bounce around pages here today. And that's Hal and Marcia. Welcome you up. And this is going to be a conversation on the discretionary and intercommunity discretionary funds necessary for the administration of the STIF in House Bill 2017. So welcome, Hal and Marcia.
Chair Simpson, Commissioner Van Brocklin, my name's Hal Gard. I have the privilege of being the administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Department of Transportation. As you recall from last month, we brought to you the results of our Rules Advisory Committee's work on the formula component of the statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. What we would like to do today is give you the results of the work that they did on the two discretionary components of that rule. I'm going to turn that over to Marcia and let her kind of walk through the details. The rules have been submitted to the entire package has been submitted to the Secretary of State, and we will be back to the Commission once the Secretary of State's process is completed for the Commission's formal adoption of those rules. So Marcia, take it away.
All right, excellent. Again, for the record, my name's Marcia Hoskins. I'm the Public Transportation Manager for the Rail and Public Transit Division, so I have that side of Hal's house. Thank you. Thanks. So as Hal noted, oh, that might make a difference, huh?
for you?
I guess not.
Jackie Land.
Thank you. All right, so as Hal noted last month, Hal, along with Karen Criswell, our project manager for standing up this program, presented the Rules Advisory Committee recommendations on general rules as well as formula. So we're now in front of you to give you an update on the two smaller components of the fund, the 5% discretionary fund and the 4% intercity fund. As Hal told you, we are now in formal rulemaking process. In fact, I think the comment period, the public comment period for these rules ends tomorrow. I don't know that we've had too many comments come in, which is actually a testament to the external outreach that has been done throughout this entire process. We had a public hearing on Tuesday, and I think we had two people show up, so I think most folks are keeping informed on this. Today I'm going to be going over the key elements of the rules, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end to, if you have questions. The key elements that are a bit different on the discretionary side are around eligibility, both the agencies that are eligible to apply as well as the types of projects that they can apply for. For the discretionary pieces of the fund, there is a match rate component, and I'll cover that, as well as we have opportunity to set some investment priorities for the discretionary piece, and the project selection process is a bit different. So I'll be going over all of those.
And sorry, just to jump in, I know that the match, there's a 20% match and then a 10% match for like smaller communities. And when you get into that piece, can you kind of go into the background of how that came to be, which
You bet.
I'm a big fan of. Thanks.
It was a lively discussion, as you can imagine. So, oops. All right, so from an eligibility perspective, if you'll remember from the formula rules, there are designated qualified entities on the formula side that receive the funds. For the discretionary components, any public transportation service provider is eligible to apply for these projects. It's a statewide competitive solicitation, and both for the discretionary piece, all types of projects are eligible except for ongoing operations. Because obviously, if you depended on a discretionary process for your ongoing operations, that's not sustainable. On the intercommunity side, all types of projects are eligible, including operations, but applicants are cautioned that, again, it's a competitive discretionary process. So for intercommunity, the connecting kinds of projects that they may submit for, the plan is to also ask them to have a sustainable funding plan that doesn't totally depend on being awarded a discretionary project. So to your match rate question, generally speaking, there will be a 20% match required for these. There was a fairly lively Rules Advisory Committee discussion about whether to even include match, and in the end, the committee decided that match would show community commitment, just kind of give a little bit more power to these particular projects. But we did tier it, so there is a 10% match rate available for communities that are under 50,000 because there was concern that some communities have trouble. You heard that yesterday from my public transportation providers coming up with match. You could potentially also show that your project fills a gap in the statewide network, that there may be a place where we really don't have a connection. We do want to reward agencies applying to serve or connect to areas outside of their normal geographic area. Or it would be, a project could be eligible for 10% match if it provides a statewide benefit like a technology project that could be replicable across. So the intent was to enlist community support in terms of match, but not penalize and totally exclude smaller communities, hence the tiered approach. The rules are also somewhat generous in terms of the kinds of things that you can use for match. You could use your formula stiff funds for match. You could use federal funds for state to match these state funds, even in-kind contributions like volunteer labor. is eligible to be used as a match for these particular projects. So our hope is that in the end, this doesn't exclude anyone from applying for one of these projects. So the rules as they're crafted do allow the commission to set investment priorities. For the first time out the gate, which we hope will be next spring, we are recommending that we go with the initial investment priorities as specified in the rule, which would be projects that help low-income households, that improve coordination and reduce gaps. We are asking that these projects be consistent with the goals specified in the Oregon Public Transportation Plan, which is also soon to be wrapped up. And as I noted earlier, we are asking that applicants show a sustainable plan for operations if that's what they're applying for. One point I want to highlight here is that in subsequent solicitations, the commission does have the ability to set additional investment priorities for these discretionary projects. For example, if we are concerned about the condition of the transit fleet, the commission could decide for one cycle, we're going to focus on replacing vehicles, or we're going to focus on other priorities. But these are the initial ones specified in the rule that we'll probably go out with for the first time.
And that's something we would visit annually, biannually?
Biannually.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So the project selection process that's spelled out in this set of rules is a bit different. Again, if you remember, the formula is sort of a conditional entitlement where we pay the funds out. For these projects, the applicants actually will submit their projects directly to ODOT, to the state. We will share with the qualified entities those projects that are in their area, and the qualified entities advisory committees will get back to us with sort of a fund note, fund, do not fund, weigh in on these projects, that they support them. They do have the option to prioritize them, but that's not required. We are going to share these applications with the area commissions on transportation, not in terms of recommending fund or do not fund, but giving them the opportunity to comment and show their support for the various projects. So you heard yesterday some of the Southwest Act members hoping that they would have the opportunity to see these discretionary projects, and they will. Our Public Transportation Advisory Committee will then make the final recommendation to the commission to fund these various awards. And in the end, we have a typo up there on the... In the end, the commission is the one who will approve and award the discretionary projects. So this next slide is specific to the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. In our next discussion, we will actually share a schedule. Commissioner Van Brocklen, I believe you asked last month for an integrated schedule that shows both the federal and the state points where we'll be coming to the commission, and that is in our next discussion. For the improvement fund specifically, you have received these discretionary rules right now. The formal process is in play. We hope to be coming back to you this summer with the final formal rules for your approval. The tax, the employee payroll tax, becomes effective July 1st. Agencies could start activities related to that program July 1st. They won't get reimbursed until later in the spring, so they would then have to pay themselves back, if you will. But we hope by next spring, by around April, to be bringing the actual improvement plans that have been reviewed by us and by our advisory committee to you all for approval. And then we would start our formula fund distributions in the spring, as well as running this discretionary grant process. So it's ambitious. We've been working hard, but we're really pretty happy with where it's going. Okay. Any other questions on our discretionary piece?
I'll just say this looks well thought through, and congratulations on moving forward, and it's a really important piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like there's obviously a lot of outreach constituents that are going to be engaged in these processes, so I would assume there's going to be some pretty interesting and exciting grants that come forward. So looking forward to next steps.
Great, thank you.
Great. Are you continuing on? Are we moving on to the next agenda, or you got some follow-up comments related to this particular agenda item?
No, we're ready to move on.
Okay, so with that, I think we're going to move right into agenda item P, which is an information on the public transportation funding, essentially highlighting the OTC's role in public transportation funding process. So you guys can go ahead and take it from here.
Let's get Jackie to cue us up. And Chair Simpson, Commissioner Van Broeklen, if you recall last month, we wanted to come back to you just to get the commission grounded on the totality of the public transportation program. And with the addition of the STIF funds, what we really wanted to do is, after that grounding, get our program on kind of a regular cycle where we're coming to the commission in a predictable fashion, in many ways mimicking the process that the folks that administer our statewide transportation improvement fund, just so that it's regular. The commission is used to the types of asks that we come to you with. So this is kind of the beginning. The pie chart on the left was shared with the commission, I believe, in Enterprise of last summer, and this really demonstrated at that time the distribution of public transportation funding that comes into the state of Oregon. As you can see, the vast majority of it is really local money that covers the majority of it. There's a huge federal share. There's a piece of that federal share that is administered by ODOT, but there's also some of the larger service providers who are direct recipients of that money, and we do not have a role there. At that time, the state component was quite minuscule. We'll get into some details. And then fares make up that purple component, and we'll get into some details because there are restrictions on how fares are used within the state. Moving over to the right side of that pie chart, this is the new disposition of funds that incorporates the STIF and the much greater state component in our funding portfolio. So here's a little bit of detail, and I'm just going to draw your attention to the right-hand side. The local component, the gray portion of that pie chart, is not part of the OTC's input. We really just talk about how we allocate some federal components and how we allocate state components. Okay. All right. There's
So Hal, on that, what constitutes the gray? Is
So
that
the gray-
direct FTA grants to transit? Where is that?
The gray component is the local contributions to public transportation and the fares that are collected in terms of operation. And so those, we don't,
The federal pass-throughs, right? Isn't that? Oh, sorry, actually, no.
stick with me. We're going to get there. This is not simple. It took me 6 years to learn it, and I'm still stupid. So just stick with me. The gray part, that's the local piece, that's the fare piece, and we don't get to play in that pond.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the commission gets to play in the federal piece and the state piece. That's where we're going. So hang on. This is not easy stuff. It's not easy stuff.
But you will be the expert.
You will be the experts. You two are going to be the commission experts on this when we're done. So you're going to be
Looking forward to it.
educating everybody else. Okay, so there are 4 major pieces of the public transportation funding package. There's the Federal Transit Administration. That's the vast majority of the federal funds. And there's about $45 million per biennium that flows through ODOT. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a component of that that is directly provided to some of the large public transportation pieces, or the large, the small and large urban providers. FHWA, there's about $25 million per biennium that is what we call flexed off the top of that funding, which is distributed for elderly and disabled transportation. And that's a mix of both legislative direction, thou shalt use some of that money to provide those services, and there's a piece that has been commission directed to go into those programs. There's the Special Transportation Fund. That's about $26 million per biennium. And that is an amalgamation of money that comes to us through a portion of the cigarette tax. It comes from ID cards, which are not considered constitutionally restricted funds because they're not tied to driving, so they don't go back into the roads. So we receive some of those monies. And there's been a fairly regular but varying amount of general fund that the legislature has provided to us. That hasn't been consistent, and it's always unknown. And that while important money, it's money that we have a lot of flexibility to use to leverage federal money, but it hasn't been dependable. And that's an important part, and it's what makes the statewide transportation improvement fund so incredibly valuable to the state, because that is dependable and money that we can use for long-term planning.
How? What was the amount again for the STF?
So the STF has been in the vicinity of 26 million.
Okay.
It varies because the legislative allocation has varied quite a bit over the biennia.
And these are biennial numbers?
These are biennial numbers.
Thank you.
Okay. The Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, the initial LFO, Legislative Finance Office estimate was $214 million per biennium. That's based upon that 0.1% employee payroll tax. You are going to hear different numbers from us. We had just released and I'm going to put every qualifier I know how to, we just released a draft planning number to provide to our qualified entities so that they actually had some amount to start building their transportation plans around. And it's about 75% of that LFO estimate. And we were super conservative for a lot of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, we would like to underpromise and overdeliver. It's a brand new tax. We have no history in terms of compliance and collection rates. There are, Department of Revenue takes their administrative fees off the top. So we just really didn't know in a sound way how much was going out. So we provided 6 quarters estimate and provided that number out to those qualified entities. There's been, I think the nice way to put it is some disappointment. Folks, I think we're looking for more money, but I think we're in a better position to really give them a workable number, and we've encouraged folks to have some projects and plans, what we'd call 30% in addition to that number, so that if we are extremely successful in collecting this tax, they're in a position to be able to add to their plans.
So just to clarify, because I'm trying to become an expert like you.
I'm not an expert.
214 was the number that you were projecting or estimating, but the 75% is what is the number that you're essentially conveying to the other transit agencies what they should be using to budget for, in essence.
To be clear, 214 is the number that was provided by the Legislative Fiscal Office. And that was the number that was discussed during the legislative session that stood up the statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. Based upon our department's conversations with the Department of Revenue and conversations with the Employment Department, they expressed some concerns that that level of tax return may be generous in the near term. So based upon that input, we provided to the qualified entities a planning number that is about 75% of the Legislative Finances Office's number. Is that okay?
Good, thanks.
So Marcia.
Well, when does that money start flowing to the, from the
thank
state?
you. Great question. I think Marcia will cover it, but I'll jump in there. So the tax starts being collected in July 1 of this year. As we mentioned earlier, the first amount of money off the top goes to the Department of Revenue to cover their administrative fees. We would like to collect 2 quarters, so we're looking at the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of 2019. So first distributions for the formula funds, we anticipate coming out in the spring of 2019. And that gives our qualified entities time to develop their plans, for us to review them, get them before the commission for approval. And then we're off to the races.
All right. So Hal passed me the complicated part. If you thought his part was complicated, it gets more fun. What we're going to try and highlight for you is for those various fund sources that Hal talked about, what kinds of things are they used for, and what is the commission's role with those various funds. So for the Federal Transit Administration funds, various federal funds, depending on what particular circular drives them, they have specified purposes. They all have different restrictions and requirements. They all have different match rates. But in general, they are used frequently for operating service. So instead of thinking of it as a project, like building a transit center, most of these funds go to just running the buses up and down the roads or providing demand response service. Some of the funds are designated for buses and bus facilities and equipment. Some of them are designated for planning. Because of these different purposes, there are different roles for the commission. So some of these funds are formula funds. They're based on population to the state, and then we turn around and distribute them out to the various agencies based on a formula. The commission, at various times over the past years, it actually does approve the formula that we ODOT use to distribute out to our agencies. In fact, I believe we will be coming to you in May with a proposed change for one of the federal formula funds. Anytime the federal funds are used for discretionary solicitations, and there are smaller amounts of them that truly are competitive discretionary, those kinds of awards would come to the commission for final approval, and I think we're back in May with some of those as well. So, anytime we, the Rail and Public Transit Division, want to apply for an additional opportunity for funding, we will get commission approval to apply for those additional federal funds. And then I noted that the commission approves formulas for some of these federal funding streams. We do, however, share information with you on how they are in the end allocated, what projects and what agencies they go to. For the Federal Highway Administration funding that Hal referenced, that is the money that is flexed over to FTA right off the top out of the statewide transportation improvement program. Those particular funds are generally intended for capital projects such as transit centers and buses, or at least for projects that use the capitalized match rate. We do also use some federal highway funds for transportation options types of fundings, although that particular program is moving over to active transportation to Amanda Pete's shop. And then we also have in the past gotten some federal lands access program funds. Again, the OTC role is to approve in general the funding level or the formula. If we formalize these funds, if we do run them as discretionary, then it is the specific awards that come to the OTC.
Just to note, some of those federal access lands monies, they're funding new service, such as the Gorge Express and the Mount Hood Loop. And those are some of some of the first new service that the state has established in decades. Mm-hmm. So that's been through use of those FLAP funds, those federal access lands funds.
It's been nice to have a new source of funding. The Special Transportation Fund that Hal noted, that's governed by rule and law. That was set up well over 35 years ago. It is intended, it's an entitlement. Most of it, 75% of the funds are a formula entitlement that are intended to improve transportation for seniors and people with disabilities. Prior to the House Bill 2017 funding, this was the most flexible source of funds for many of our agencies. For some of the small rural counties, it was their only source of funds. They didn't have the capacity to access federal funds, so this was what they operated on. 25% of those funds, if enough cash builds up and if we have enough available to offer a discretionary program, rule and law do allow that, and in that case, we have in the past brought the discretionary awards through our Public Transportation Advisory Committee and then to the Commission to approve. But as Hal noted, the general fund fluctuation that's been designated for this has, for some biennia, precluded offering a discretionary program. There just hasn't been enough cash coming in. And then, of course, we are now standing up the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. It's now a dedicated, sustainable source of funding for our transit agencies. The formula component has no match required, very flexible, can be used for capital, can be used for operations. Parts of it are intended, of course, to improve connections between communities. And the Commission has had you all have had a larger role in that, right? You will approve rules once they've gone through the process. I noted that we will be bringing discretionary criteria to you for approval. You will actually be the ones approving the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund plans that the qualified entities do. And then by 2020, we are directed to provide a progress report to the legislature, which of course will come through you as well.
So back to me, and Commissioner Van Brocklen, here's the timelines that you asked for. So this year, this is the specific one because there's a lot of new work. This spring, as you just have, you've received the Rules Advisory Committee recommendations on the STIF and their recommendations on how to administer the discretionary inter-community funds. We'll be coming to you for approval of some federal discretionary transit awards, and we're coming to you to approve a proposed federal change in our formula. That will be at the May meeting when we get there. This summer, of course, the rules will be up before you again for final approval for the STIF, and then we'll be back to you in the fall to start the process of adopting our new Oregon Public Transportation Plan. And that's just timely. I'd love to say that Jerry's team and my team were smart and we saw the STIF coming and we stood up our new transportation plan to perfectly align and guide all that work. No, it was just pure serendipity that we started development of our plan and new funds arrived, but it's a bit of a blessing because it is going to be the roadmap for the next 30 years at least of how we're going to develop public transportation in this state. So that is some pretty exciting stuff. In the great grand large picture, this it outlines it for the next 2 years, but this would be the sequence that the Commission can expect us to come before you with regular decision making action. So in the springtime period, we'll be coming to you to approve the STIF plans as the cycle rolls through in terms of completion of those plans and resubmittal of new plans. And you'll be receiving information on our federal formula transit awards that are ongoing on a regular basis. And what we really want to do is get those processes lined up so that we're not before you every month with some kind of new ask. Get those in sequence. In the summertime period, we'll be there with any kind of discretionary grants and awards. And again, if we have federal discretionary or STF discretionary awards, we would line those up so that you're seeing those at the same time. In the wintertime, again, you would be receiving progress reports that we'd be submitting to the legislature at the beginning of their session in the following year. And you'd be receiving overall progress reports on the transit system in the state. And then springtime, again, we're back to you with federal discretionary transit awards. And with that, you know as much as I know about public transportation. I'm going to give it to Marcia to let her bat clean up.
So do you have a question?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to Hal's point, it is a mix of lots of different pots of money, some federal, now 2 different state pots, with varying purposes, varying restrictions. Our intent, as Hal said, is to make this as what am I going to say, routinized as we can, so that both for my staff and then for you all and for our external agencies, that they get on a biennial cycle, they know what's expected, they know what's coming, they know how to plan for it, and particularly for operations, they know when the funds will flow through. As Hal noted, we'll be back in May with a requested change to our rural general public formula. That's proposed by our advisory committee. In fact, I think we're going to have an advisory committee member here to present it to you, their process and their recommended change. It actually will move the formula to a more performance-based model, which is a positive thing, rewarding good performance, a little bit less formula funds if you're not seeing the rides and miles that we hoped you would see. We'll also be bringing our advisory committee's recommended discretionary awards for some various federal funds that accumulated. Some of them are for elderly and disabled operations. Some of them are for buses and bus facilities. And then it will also include the first year of the commission directed in the 1921 STIP $5 million a year for 3 years for bus replacements. And so we have that first set of proposed bus replacements for that $5 million, and that we'll be bringing to you next month. There you go.
Great report. Thank you so much for putting together all this information. It's very helpful to me. Alando, I know, already knew all of it, but I really appreciate your bringing it forward. It caused me to think that PowerPoint presentations like this would be very helpful to have available to the commission to look back to, and that some kind of a way to access some of these, not every single PowerPoint that comes in front of us, but if we could maybe work to generate something we could, are they all online? Okay. Online. Okay, so you just need to educate me how to get there. Thank you, Jackie. I also really appreciate the fact that you've got a schedule here that tells us where we're going and that when we can expect to see you and what you'll be asking for, so thanks for the heads up. Great work, keep going.
Yeah, and I concur with those sentiments. I just appreciate the transparency and the amount of effort you guys are putting into this to keep us dialed in on our particular benchmarks. One question I had related to this was, you had indicated on the PowerPoint that the STIF plan was going to be coming up in spring of 19. Is there going to be a draft that's coming to the commission leading up to that point, or how are we going to get to that place?
So these are the actual improvement plans that the qualified entities are submitting in order to get their formula allocation. That's
The
what that.
third parties, okay. got
Yeah.
it.
Although we will, I assume, do some summaries as well
Yeah.
as what those funds are buying.
Okay.
Chair Simpson, it's going to be clunky out the gate, I promise you. This is new money and a new process, and I have no illusions that we're going to get it right out the gate. But we hope that we put a review process that is rigorous and transparent in place, and we take advantage of your Public Transit Advisory Committee, which has stood up at the pleasure of the commission, to do the really hard review, vetting, and questioning, so that we're bringing you a summary of plans that we feel meet both the rule of the law, the criteria set forth in rule, and so that shouldn't be an onerous process. I would hate to take the commission's time to grind through 32 different plans that are in a bunch of detail. But certainly, we will make all that information available.
And when you guys get a chance, could you send me a copy of the members that are part of the STIF Advisory Committee?
Absolutely.
Great.
Well, just a second. Public Transportation Advisory Committee, or each individual advisory committee that's going to be stood up by the qualified entities? There'll be 42 of those, and we don't have really a say of who sits on those. We'll give you whatever information you want. I just want to be clear.
Or the Rules Advisory Committee.
The Rules Advisory Committee.
Got it.
Rules Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes.
Exactly. Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is that it? Are we done? Closing out? All right. Thank you, Hal. Next, I believe, unless we're going to move around to H, I believe we're going to follow through with agenda item Q. That's correct. All right. Agenda item Q, which happens to be a quarterly report, performance report, which is, I believe, first quarter 2018. So Travis and Paul, the show is in your hands.
Thank you. Chair Simpson, Commissioner Van Brockland. For the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director. The first thing I should note is your agenda shows this as an action item, but there is no particular need for the commission to formally accept this item, and you do not have a quorum. So this is going to become an informational item, but in the future, we will put it on as an acceptance of this report. You'll recall back in October and even before, the commission had been chatting and asking for some sort of dashboard for them to be able to have visibility into key program areas and the performance of the department, and also wanting a little bit more information on particular projects. Based on conversations with all of the commission members, what we proposed was putting together a quarterly performance report that would give you insight into the agency's major programs, our performance across some of those areas, as well as specific projects. So this is your first quarterly performance report. We took our previous quarterly programs report and modified it a bit to add some performance data as well as specific projects. This is explicitly a beta test, to use a tech industry term, and we will plan to iterate from here. We wanted to roll something out to you, give it to you in this format that we think meets most of what you requested, and then get your feedback and find out from you what more or different things you may want in this report. There are three different elements of this. The first is an online dashboard, and I emailed you a link to that the other day. It's also linked in the table of contents page that basically is online data about our safety, performance, project delivery, customer service, passenger rail are the four areas we have included to date. We included those because we actually have meaningful monthly or quarterly data in a way that we don't say about our bridges or pavement. Those data come in on more of a biennial basis or annual basis, and there is not much change in our bridge conditions, as you can imagine, on a monthly or quarterly basis. So it felt like it would be more appropriate to continue to report those on an annual basis through our annual performance report, which is now something that you will get on an annual basis as a report from ODOT. So we focused really on those areas where we felt that there was meaningful, regular, updated data. The second component after the online dashboard is a written report on key initiatives. This is the document that you have before you today. And then the Commission also asked for a verbal report where we could come before you and have a conversation and mainly get questions from you. So typically that will be me talking about the actual document and the programs, Paul talking about projects, and then Troy Kostalis will typically come up and give a brief discussion on a safety topic. This month, Troy is back in Salem, given, again, it seemed less efficient to have him come down for a 5-minute presentation than perhaps just to roll that into a future conversation of the Commission. So he'll come and talk about pedestrian safety, which is the topic of included in this quarterly performance report in the near future. So I will just, in general, briefly go through one or more topics in the report. This month, I wanted to bring forward to you the work we're doing on road usage charging in the Origo program. It's one I'm particularly proud of. It's a program run out of our Office of Innovation that is leading the nation on developing a potential replacement for the gas tax to work through the issues of vehicles becoming more fuel efficient and many of them not even using the fuels we currently tax. The Origo program is an operational road usage charge program that has about 700 volunteers in it to date. But what's most exciting to me is some of the work we're doing on improving that program and developing policy options for the future. So for example, right now, we are starting this year a small-scale interstate interoperability pilot program with Washington State, which is another leader in this area. And that will be a prelude to a larger scale interoperability pilot program with California, because we know that if this program is ever going to become real and a real taxation program, it's going to have to be able to operate across state lines, just as fuels tax or any of those others work today. We are also testing new technologies. Today, we have just one technology, which is essentially the mileage reporting device that you plug into your car. But we believe that there's opportunities in the future with in-vehicle telematics that are already collecting data. We also think that there may be something to do with smartphones. Most people are carrying these around today, and there's an opportunity perhaps to have a system that is connected into systems in the car to provide the data on mileage. We're also looking at things that are as simple as taking pictures of your odometer reading and sending that in order to prove how far you've driven. So we're looking at a whole variety of these, including manual reporting, so that people wouldn't have to have technology in the car. At the same time, our Road User Fee Task Force, which is a legislatively chartered group, is looking at what they can do in the 2019 legislative session to continue moving the Origo program forward from essentially a volunteer program to a revenue collection program that perhaps someday will be mandatory. So that is some of the exciting work we're doing within the Origo road usage charging arena. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul to talk about some projects.
Thank you, Travis, members of the Commission. Chair Simpson, Paul Mather, Highway Division Administrator. So similar to what Travis did for you, I will plan to do similar on the project, but in the quarterly report in your packet, page 13 starts a list of projects. These are the ones that we've kind of noted as the more significant projects around the state that I think you will want to track on a quarterly basis going forward. But in any given quarter, there's probably other projects, probably maybe less noteworthy on a bigger scale, but in that quarter are having significant events that I will, just as Travis did, highlight for you of kind of the current events of current things that are happening around the regions and so forth. So I'll be prepared, as I am today, to answer questions of the published projects there, starting on page 13, but also give you some highlights. So moving into those highlights of projects, I touched on this as we've had conversations yesterday and today about the work in Portland. On the interstate system in particular, we have a tremendous amount of work that will be happening this summer and over the next several summers, and we're putting a lot of work to sequence that and time that and minimize delays for users. But just to highlight some of the work that's going to be going on and has begun already this summer. First is the project we've talked about a couple times already, the I-5 project from roughly 217 to 205 and the additional paving and additional lane that'll be added there.
Similarly, there's a project to repave I-5 north of Portland from roughly the interstate bridge down to I-405. That will be largely night work, but will be a significant project impacting the interstate. Probably the most impactful project we'll have this summer is the bridge work that we'll be doing on the freeway junction between I-84 and I-5. So as you come into Portland on I-84 and you hit the I-5 junction, there's kind of a spider web of ramps that go off, and each one of those need to have their decks replaced, repaired, and so we're going to have a sequencing of closures of those ramps this summer to do that work, and it would be a tremendous amount of outreach that we'll be doing, and obviously there'll be an impact as we do that work. We also have work going on 205 that's already underway, a paving project from about the airport south that will be really, it's kind of a phase one of the project that's listed in House Bill 2017 that we've referred to as a trigger project that will happen next year. That will dovetail right with this. It adds auxiliary lanes and repaves the interstate on 205. We also have on 205 some paving work finishing up from last summer still from Oregon City onto south to Stafford that will be finishing up. We have active transportation work also, the signs that we see on 217 and other parts of our system, we're expanding that into I-84 and 205, and that work will be also beginning this summer. So a lot of work and a lot of coordination and a lot of outreach that we'll be doing to inform motorists of that work. And we'll continue to work on our broader strategy of the additional projects we have coming up, the bigger projects and even more impactful project we have coming up, and how we're going to sequence those going forward. Similarly, in the Eugene area, we have kind of their version of this type of work going on. We have a paving project that will essentially repave all of the Beltline Highway in Eugene, a little bit short on the I-5 end, a little bit short on the 126 end, but it covers just about the entire length. It will dovetail into another paving project that covers on 126 from where the Beltline intersection all the way on out to Veneta will be a separate paving project. So if you're traveling maybe home from here and you're wanting to go through Florence and 126, that route, not through route as well as in Eugene, will be impacted by paving work going on this summer. So again, in that area, we're doing outreach with media and other partners to highlight those impacts and the timing of those impacts. And like in Portland, it's a prelude to more work that's going to be happening the following summer at the Delta Beltline interchange to make capacity improvements and operational improvements in that area. Some of the work that's going on in Region 3 were highlighted in the handouts we had for you prior to the meeting. The most significant work going on in the area is in the Rogue Valley and Highway 62 and the work that we're doing there. That continues to go well and plan to have that new facility open later this year. In the Region 4 area, we have another roundabout project that kind of highlights the work that they've got going on this summer. If you've been through Sisters recently, you've noticed the new roundabout on the west end of Sisters that has won several awards and has really improved the operations and the functions. We have similarly a roundabout in Prineville that's under construction. It was partially funded by House Bill 2017. But it's at the kind of the top of the hill in Prineville where the Facebook facility is, where Les Schwab's facility is. We'll be doing a large amount of improvements to the configurations of the roadways and focusing those around a new roundabout in that area. The work in Region 5 is really focused on a lot of paving work on the freeway. We highlighted a couple of those projects over the last couple of meetings, but continue to focus on preservation of the interstate system and the operation of I-84 through eastern Oregon. Those are some of the highlights of the projects. I will tell you just internally in the organization, we continue to
kind of digest House Bill 2017, take the positions that we were successful in adding to our program, go through and get those positions filled. We have a lot of transitions going on in the department right now between retirements and the new positions, and just really getting the details around our plans together of how we sequence projects, design projects, improve our processes. There's a lot of things that we have in motion right now that will bear some good fruit, but we're in the trenches right now doing a lot of those work and filling those positions and preparing ourselves for the additional revenue and the additional expectations that come with House Bill 2017.
With that, we would be happy to answer any questions, and in particular, if there are any comments you have about the format or the information, too much, too little, different, something entirely different, please let us know.
So on the format, I think it's fine and about the right level. As you said, as we go along, we may want to suggest things as we're working with it, but I think it's great to have, and thanks for doing it. And I think it's a great tool to have ongoing. My question really is around public outreach and public information. Maybe we could get 5 minutes today, maybe picking a couple of projects to tell us kind of how you approach that, and then perhaps in a future meeting, maybe even the May meeting, if we could get a little bit more on that 15 or 20 minute presentation that just walks us through that. So I think that is going to be essential as we are doing all this. And I'm sure you all agree and are already way ahead of any thoughts I've got on it. But I do think having the commission informed a little bit deeper on public communication, because that's the kind of thing we would hear. We don't hear about any of this stuff, and all of a sudden, they're closing all the lanes at I-84, I-5, that whole spider web that you talk about, and, things are now closed up, nobody told us, et cetera. I'd like to have a informed comeback to that rather than just, really?
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit today, and then maybe we could schedule more in May, or, well, I'm not going to be at the June meeting, but so May for me before we get really heavy into it in the summer.
Good, Commissioner. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think the project that that I highlighted there, the bridge project at 84 and I-5 would be a good one for you to understand specifically the work that we're doing. The communications that we do with the public is one of the more important things that we do with a project to really deem it to be a successful project. That work needs to start very early on to develop a plan, to develop outreach with our partners, that we're all communicating, kind of singing off the same sheet of music. It also needs to be integrated with the project, that we understand the impacts to the project and understand the message that we're trying to communicate to the public. And then as we get into communications, those communications are very diverse, layered, and as we see just the expectations of the public of how they want to be communicating, the avenues that we have seems to be ever changing, whether it's a social media platform, whether it's traditional media, press release, press conferences, however. So our approach is very much tailored to the project and very much tailored to the community that we have, utilizing all those different techniques that are available to us. You will see, for example, in Eugene, I got a briefing paper from the region just on that topic, and it was about 3 pages long, and they've been working on the outreach for the paving work and all the construction work that's going to be going on in Eugene for the last, probably the last year, but specifically the last several months. Again, sitting down with our partners, working with them to understand their impacts that they're going to have on the system, the impact we're going to have, planning news conferences with media outlets, sitting down with those news outlets and media outlets and having them understand firsthand the impact so they can report it accurately to the public and timely to the public. And then our social media, as we are finding more and more the different platforms, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or others, that we find that to be very, very effective. A lot of those kind of communications don't happen until right before the project. So right now we're still in very much the planning foundation setting for that, but ramping up to that messaging that we will have becomes very important as we come to those very critical dates with the project. We also, as you saw this morning with the contractor, we need to be in sync with their schedule and understand their approach and the exact timing that they have with the project. So it's a lot of work that we do in communications start early on, but it grows and develops as the project becomes more and more specific. But we know we need to start early on to set that foundation and set the overall game plan and kind of the blanks to fill in as we go through the process. So that's in general our approach with the two things that I highlighted in Eugene and in Portland with traffic, but it's a project-specific one would be good to get in front of you to see as we approach not just the bridge work in Portland, but ultimately the work we're going to plan on the interstate bridge in a few years on the Trunnion project. You're going to hear more and more about that as we have some very severe impacts to traffic in the Portland area.
And I assume you're partnering with local government on this, both in terms of using them as an outlet and also learning from what, for example, Multnomah County has learned from the Hawthorne Bridge, the Ross Island Bridge, the Morrison Bridge, which were, I would say, significant in terms of their impact on traffic flow and had implications. So I'm sure you're doing all of this stuff. I just want to understand it myself at some level as we're getting into these, because I'm quite confident that even if we do everything right, there's going to be criticism. And it's just helpful for us to, again, it's helpful for us to know as we're running in across opinion leaders and business leaders, et cetera, that they understand, well, actually, we've done a very thorough effort here. So to provide a little cover to the degree we can for all the work that is done, just having some level of information about it would be helpful.
Yeah, having our professionals in Region 1 do a much better job than I have, just get into some of the specifics of the project, I think would be good for you to hear that, so you have the information, but also so you have some confidence in just how we approach the work.
And that could be at a commission meeting, but it could also just be a briefing, in some other setting. I'm not saying everything's got to be loaded up on the agenda every month, but I just see that coming. I don't know if you have a different view of it. I just know I'll be asked by people as things start percolating, what is going on here and how long is this going to last, and I want to be a partner in delivering the message.
You need to be part of our communication strategy. Yes.
I want to be a part of at least not impeding your communication strategy.
I think, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Van Brocklen, your counsel and insights are very important to us. I mean, getting out in front of this, extremely important. It is the flip side of the earlier comment you made in terms of folks wanting to see, when are we going to improve the infrastructure? I think what you see is it's coming, and there are implications, and people will be impacted here. So we will speak to that as well as the benefit of the investment, but it is that comprehensive conversation using all the communication platforms that Mr. Mather spoke to, and then maybe more, because this is a unique situation. I don't think we have seen this level of activity. Well, I can tell you, we have not seen this level of activity since I've been at the Oregon Department of Transportation. So we have something significant coming at us in the near term and in the longer term, just given the investment levels that came with House Bill 2017.
Yeah, Director, I think this is a little bit reminiscent to me of when we were doing the light rails, but trying to do like 3 of the lines at once. That's what it kind of feels like to me is coming. It's not just, okay, now we're going to do the Banfield, and then we're going to do the West Side, now we're going to do the Interstate, then we're going to do the Orange Line out to Milwaukee. It's like, we're going to do 3 of these, and it's going to be hitting all parts of the region, and I don't think we can underestimate or under-communicate on this. I mean, we over-communicate on this. I think we can under-communicate on it. I don't think it's possible for us to over-communicate on it. So that's why I feel like the commission needs to be assisting rather than, I worry that if we're not informed, then we're potentially impeding in some way, and I don't want to do that. I want to be supportive.
Great. I 100% agree. Communication is vitally important given all the significant changes that we're going to be going through and the amount of investment that's going to be put on the system and just the strain. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of upset people, I would assume. So we just have to prepare for that and try to get ahead of it as best as we can. There's one area in this document that's kind of making my stomach turn a little bit, and it's our first piece, which is safety. As I'm looking at this and comparing last quarter of the first quarter of 2017 versus first quarter of 18, we're about 20% up in fatalities, and that's a little concerning to me. One, we're losing lives. Again, obviously that's a broad concern for anybody. But as this relates to what we're kind of diving into now, I would assume with all the work going on, there's going to be so much diversion onto other streets and even ODOT facilities, especially in those urban environments. And I think we have to pay attention to this piece because the last thing we want to do is have those numbers continuously go up. And so I'm curious as to what other states' numbers are compared to ours, even though you never want to talk about this in the context of like a benchmark. But the reality is that we're somewhere. How do we start getting down? And how do we partner with our other agencies or other constituents across the country or even the world to figure out how are they minimizing fatality impacts on their systems?
Chair Simpson, Commissioner Van Brocklin, I will largely defer that to Troy Costalis when he comes in front of the commission. I can tell you that most other states have seen a significant increase in fatalities, just as we have over the last several years. Last year, we were actually able to reverse that trend, even as many other states were seeing continued climb. This year, unfortunately, you can see in the first quarter that we have not seen progress. In fact, it's gone the opposite direction. And so this is an area where we are continuously vigilant and continuously work to improve on our programs and efforts. And Mr. Costalis will talk specifically about that. I believe we have him on the agenda in June, where he can give you a lot better sense of all that we're doing across the entirety of the areas. I believe it was earlier this year, late last year, he talked to you about our speed reduction efforts, where we had course corrected as we saw a large number of speed-related deaths, and we're able to get funding out to local law enforcement partners in order to specifically address that. So we take a look at this data that comes in. There is some preliminary data that we have that is enough to begin to modify our program focus and look at where we need to put specific emphasis. And then we look at the long term as well and really figure out where are we needing to put more resources into, whether it was an area of speed, which is a traditional concern that has been one of the largest areas of focus, for decades, or an emerging area like distracted driving, where this is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, and we just did a distracted driving press event at Portland International Raceway that allowed the media to come in and experience what it was like to drive distracted. It was the one time we said it was okay to actually use your cell phone while driving. And so we are always pushing to better understand the data and how it can help us improve our programs to keep more people alive.
Great. I would refer back to our introduction in the director's report about West Salem's students, as I would assume, as we all know, those are going to be our drivers of the future, our high school students. And I would encourage the department to reach out to some of those high schools and other institutions to talk to the next generation about, what their thoughts are, or coming up with ideas and concepts of how they can play a role in minimizing some of these trajectories that are going in the wrong direction as it relates to fatalities on our system. I think that'd be very beneficial for us to get them engaged.
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent suggestion. Again, in challenging problem, a little question. It plays itself out on many different fronts, and you normally hear us speak about the 4 E's. Paul just got through with one of the E's, engineering. How do we engineer safe infrastructure here? So all those projects obviously have that safety theme woven into them. But to your point, education is a second E, so to speak, and how we inform from the first time someone grabs a book and starts informing themselves to take that knowledge test that eventually leads to the test behind the wheel. What are we communicating there? I think that's, again, a interdisciplinary conversation between our safety professionals and our DMV folks. And then we have the enforcement levels, challenged on fronts. I mean, talk to the OSP superintendent. They are at the lowest point ever in terms of the number of troops on the ground, just boots on the ground. They're just not there. We are the only state on the West Coast, if not the nation, that does not have 24/7 patrol. I think we're 49th out of 50 states in terms of our level per population at that level. So from engineering to education to enforcement to, again, our work with the emergency services, how we respond. Timing is very important when these accidents do happen. How do we triage them and move people forward? All that is part of the conversation, and I think Mr. Brower said it right. I think Mr. Costales can bring what we are doing specifically here in the state of Oregon, and just given his engagement on the national level. What are we seeing? What can we bring back home? And then how do we engage those folks that are just entering into the driving population to reinforce the significant obligation and responsibility that comes with the privilege of driving a motor vehicle.
Great. With that, unless you guys have anything else, I believe we can wrap that piece up. Commissioner Van Brockman, you have any more comments?
Good report.
Yeah, thank you again. It was actually, and aside from that, I do like the format, Travis, by the way. It definitely is clear and concise. Appreciate that. Moving along, I believe we're going to move a little bit backwards and go back to agenda item H. And this actually will be a little bit of an update on the work that the Southern Oregon Regional Solutions team has been engaged in. And so Mr. Usselman and Southern Oregon Regional Solutions team, welcome, and glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Chair Simpson and Commissioner Van Brocklen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk a little bit about what our Region Solutions team has been working on over the last year. I'm here to really introduce a member of the Region Solutions Advisory Board, Jim Seeley. He's also a member or a employee of Bandon Dunes Resort Golf Course. And so with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Seeley.
Okay. Faced a lot of things yesterday, but I want you to know how important it is for us to get in front of you, because down here on the south coast of Oregon, we have a couple of issues that I think most Oregonians don't understand and have an appreciation of, and we think it's important that ODOT and the Commission understand it, and that's specifically Sudden Oak Death and Gorse. And by way of telling our story, I'm going to ask that the lights be diminished, and I've got two. Do you have the sod piece that you can show, Sarah Navarro's?
So there's two files. Do you want the other one first?
Yes, please. And one of the things that I've learned about these two projects is that it's a word, a picture is worth a million words. And so an awful lot of this story is going to be told in pictures.
Looks like these are the only two files on here. So this is a, but
I can see if I can get it.
it looks like there's several pictures in here.
No, that's the Gorse Action Group piece. The Sarah Navarro's, I thought you already had.
There's a handout that's in the.
Okay, well then,
Is that on the book?
yes.
Yeah,
Son
the
of
handout,
Death.
they have that in.
Well, Sarah Navarro had a presentation, and because she couldn't be here today, I was going to give it for her. And it really does a good job in 5 simple slides of telling the story. It's a great example of communication and outreach. But maybe while you're seeing if you can find that, do you have a clicker that I can click through these with? Oh, okay, very good. All right, what I'm going to be talking about is the Gorse Action Group. And we are an organization that was put together. Where's the camera? Can we adjust the camera a little bit to get the full picture up there? Anyhow, gorse is a highly invasive weed. It's an extremely flammable species that poses serious fire risk, and it threatens both the environment and the economy. And I want to give you a simple series of pictures to tell you why. Bandon burned in the 1930s thanks to gorse. And that's what the downtown area and the docks looked like when that fire was finished. And there's been 11 additional years of fires in Bandon since then. I've just picked out some examples for you. 1957, 1980, that person in the upper right is Lanny Boston, our current fire chief. He's lived with it for all his life. And here's an example of a fire in 2007. And here's one in 2015. These were just north of Bandon. They were started by campfires at the end of Whiskey Run Road at Whiskey Run Beach. And there's an example of a couple of people fighting those fires. 52 acres of gorse became fully inflamed within 30 minutes of a spark from an all-terrain vehicle starting it. And that's just an example of how explosive it is as a fire hazard. There are 35,000 acres of gorse in Oregon, and we realized how big a problem it is, and we figured we needed to bring the attention to more people and get their attention in a stronger way. So we sought Oregon Solutions status, and Governor Kate Brown designated the Gorse Action Group as an Oregon Solutions project in 2017. Representative Caddy McEwen served as co-convener with me as we marched this thing through the process. And in December of 2017, we had a signing, and there's a whole bunch of people now that are members of the Gorse Action Group. And I got to tell you, when we first started fighting this battle, we being WRCA, we couldn't get people to want to talk about it because it's such an expensive problem, and it's been a problem here for over 100 years, and nobody's figured it out. So people quit caring, and we learned that. And so how do we get people to care? And Mr. Kaiser is the owner of Bandon Dunes Golf Resort. Bandon Dunes exists today because it was 2,500 acres of gorse-choked property that was good for nothing else. He's a visionary, saw a great golf product, is now a world-famous golf destination, but he also learned how expensive it is to deal with. Anywhere from $2,000 to $3,500 an acre to create 4 golf courses out of that. And so he gave us, WRCA, the mission of trying to figure out what we could do about gorse. And this was our first step, was to try to get a lot of people interested in it and helping us get the message out. And So part of what we've decided that we need to do is demonstration projects so the community will realize what it's all about. And I'd like to point out that Robert Mawson, the city manager of Bandon, is in the group with us today. He's a member of the Gorse Action Group. But that on the right there is US 101 going south just outside Bandon. And that parallel road that you see is a gravel privately owned road, and then that's all Gorse Choke property to the left of it. And when you drive down 101 and look at it, all you see is just a line of gorse. You have no idea how deep it goes. Well, it goes deep. It goes all the way to the Bandon Airport. And so we decided that this would be a great place for a demonstration project. And so we started work on it, and this was preparation work before the clearing began. And do you see a fence there at all, by the way? After one day of clearing, we found that fence, and that clearing was done by the Shutter Creek Correctional Institute inmate crew. And boom, now all of a sudden all the people driving down that road didn't know a fence was there, no offense is there. And then we brought in 6 different contractors to help grind all that gorse, and they donated their time so that we could do a demonstration that people could see. And we've picked out a number of different areas along there that we can clear the gorse in different methods and treat it afterwards in different methods. And this is a 2-year program to show which methods best stop the regrowth and which ones work the best. Yes?
Question, so in the grinding process, given its invasive nature, I would assume that material has to be disposed of in like a landfill or something, because
No,
putting it back out.
I'll get to that in a minute as part of this program. What they do is grind it to a maximum to let it lay on the ground, and then try to put a proper material in there to compete against it. And converting it to grazing is an example of a way to do it. But you can't truck gorse anywhere. It's against the law because it's so spreadable. But anyhow, you can see almost all of the demonstration projects cleared now, except for the last little pieces that are in the middle there. And there's signage that's been put up where all those arrows are that can be read and seen clearly from 101. And that's an example of what those signs will look like, so that people who gain an interest in it and want to learn more about it can drive up on that gravel road, read each one of those signs. And so it gives us a really good idea of what gorse is all about. And then I'd like to switch. You were talking earlier about some of the big bridge issues you have in Oregon. I want to talk about one of the smallest bridge issues that you have on 101, and this is a real issue. Bullard's Bridge, which crosses the Coquille River just north of Bandon, Oregon, is the narrowest bridge on Highway 101. And you can look at that and you can see, where do the pedestrians walk, where do the bicyclists go? It's a real hazard. And just to give you a further idea of how skinny that bridge is. So anyhow, we're going to do another demonstration project. Both north and south of that bridge are gorse patches. This area was taken during the summer when gorse is not in bloom. But just north and south of the bridge, we'll be doing a similar demonstration project, and we'll put similar signage up with the help of ODOT, our friends here that tell us where we can and can't put signs and how big and how little they have to be. But it's a great opportunity to put the word out. And 2 important things for you to know. The Oregon Coast Trail, which is under OPRD responsibility, they've been assigned the responsibility of finishing the Oregon Coast Trail by the governor in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the existence of the People's Coast and the Oregon Coast Trail. That's part of the Oregon Coast Trail. And the Oregon Coast Trail is principally hikers. So think of that bridge picture I just showed you. And also, ODOT has been assigned the responsibility of finishing the Oregon Coast Bike Route. And that's part of the Oregon Coast Bike Route. So we've got 3 really important reasons to do something about it. It's dangerous as it is, and it's part of 2 very important trails. And we've been informed by knowledgeable people that the Oregon Coast Trail, upon completed properly, will be one of the 5 best destinations in the world to experience a over 300-mile hike on a trail system. So it's a wonderful opportunity for outreach to the Pacific Rim and European and the rest of the United States for tourism. And Bullard's Beach State Park is just to the northwest of that. And Bullard's Beach State Park happens to be the 11th busiest out of the 78 parks on Oregon's coastal region. Over 673,000 visitors there in 2016. And we get a lot of comments and complaints from those visitors about the lack of safety in crossing that bridge. And a high percent of those visitors are cyclists. They drive in their car with their bicycle behind them on their truck or on their RV, and they want to go to Bandon across the bridge on their bike, and a lot of them are afraid to do it, so they take their cars to town. And then I have a position on the Oregon Invasive Species Council. I was invited to join that council because of the work they learned that we were doing on gorse. And it was while on that council that I also learned about sod. But the Oregon Invasive Species Council has the mission of preventing the introduction of invasive species and to eradicate, contain, or manage existing invasive species in Oregon. With respect to gorse, there is no known way to eradicate it. The seed is in the ground 50 to 75 years. Burning it doesn't harm it at all. It just kills everything else except the gorse seed, and the gorse seed will come back within a few months, and within 2 to 3 years it's this high again, off and running. The agencies engaged in invasive species and natural resource management should be engaged with the Oregon Invasive Species Council, and some agencies, including ODOT, have an important role to play but are not currently represented as council members. And the Invasive Species Council has developed and is recommending a legislative concept for 2019 that would revise council membership and would make ODOT one of the active members of the Oregon Invasive Species Council. And I got to tell you, as a layperson on that council, and the things that I've learned about how invasive species are transported by vehicles, sod is one, and gorse is definitely one. It's really important that we have proper representation. This is an example of the seed bed of a gorse plant. And that's an example of a big piece of equipment that's grinding weeds and invasive or undesired species, including gorse. And you can imagine how those gorse seeds get in there. And we need wash stations. And ODOT and local contractors agree that a wash station would be used frequently by their crews. To do the demonstration project on 101, we had to create a temporary wash station with the help of a nearby business. But there is water out there, and we'd really love to have ODOT work with us to provide an appropriate amount of wash stations. And all you need to do when you look at the presence of gorse, any place that there's been clear cutting being done for 50, 60, 80 years on the South Coast, we didn't understand that back 100 years ago, and during the clear cut, the gorse seed was tracked into those areas, and now, right after those are clear cut, it's going to be back to gorse, and you can see it when you do a flyover. And we know from the Department of Agriculture, a 2014 estimate, that if we don't stop the spread of this invasive species, that it would become one of the 3 most expensive invasive species to the state of Oregon. And it would be like 11% of a $2.4 billion annual expense that gorse, if it's not contained, would become. And here's an example of flyover of areas that have been clear cut and logged, and then the gorse coming back. And it'll be 5 to 8 years before those properties have enough Doug fir growing back in them to shade out the gorse. That one on the right is 150 acres. That's real close to, that's Highway 101 that's running by it, and against the ocean shore is Bandon Dunes Golf Resort. We have staffers every day that drive within 200 yards of that gorse field to go to work, had no idea that there was a gorse field there. You can't see it from an automobile. You got to fly over it. And Here's a picture of Frank Burris, OSU extension agent from OSU. Is a private pilot, owns his own plane, and he volunteered if we'd cover his gas costs to fly members of the Gorse Action Group over the region to let them see how pervasive gorse is. And I know City Manager Robert Mawson is just, he's amazed at this. That area of gorse that you see in the middle there is what we call the donut hole. It's 225 acres of gorse-infested real estate right in the middle of Bandon, but it's unincorporated Coos County. So the laws that the city of Bandon has don't allow them to go in and require homeowner treatment of that. And it's a huge fire hazard. I showed you the earlier fires. That's a huge fire hazard. And that's 101 that you see going right by it. And people going down 101 would look to the left. They'd have no idea that there's 250 acres of fire hazard out there. And remember back to those early pictures of Bandon burning and the multiple fires since then. In my opinion, that's one of the biggest urban fire hazards in the state of Oregon, and we got to do something about it. So that's the Gorse Action Group. Did you find that? Okay, well, that's too bad. But basically, sudden oak death is a new species we're dealing with. We've been dealing with it since about, I don't know, 2000, and it got here from California. It's in 13 states or counties in California, and Representative David Brock Smith has been doing an awful lot of work on assessing the potential harm that sudden oak death will do if it's not contained. And so he's been beating the bushes to try to get money to deal with it. And there's two strains of it, the North American strain, which is the first one that they discovered, and it's the one that's been in California. And it basically loves tan oak, but it is unlikely to get into other species, although it can be spread by wind-blown moisture and by vehicular traffic, because people, you know, somebody out cutting wood cuts some tan oak to take home to burn, and he's driving down the road with it. Not good. And it's believed that the initial introduction of sudden oak death to Oregon came in a nursery. They can't prove it, but they think it was. That nursery subsequently closed, but over 100 species are threatened by sudden oak death, and to get those into our nursery system in Oregon would be really damaging. There's 4 counties in Oregon that are threatened. 30% of Coos County or Curry County is already quarantined, and so it's important that we do something about it. And there's a similarity between sudden oak death and gorse, and that is that early detection, rapid response can still work for sudden oak death. It failed many years ago with gorse because we didn't understand that concept then. But what we need is citizen scientists out there who understand these two maladies, who can help report existing areas of it or new areas of it. And when you talk about the 35,000 acres of gorse that's already there, how do we prevent it from becoming 40,000? We need some citizen scientists dealing with that, and we need to teach them why they should care, and help teach them how to see it and who to report it to. And with these things today, it's real easy to report invasive species and get them on a map and get them in front of the people that know what to do with them. But I'd like to close by re-emphasizing the importance that I feel that it is that ODOT become very involved with the Oregon Invasive Species Council. And I'd be happy to take any questions at this point.
Well, thank you for being here. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to see all the gorse everywhere. It kind of reminded me of the movie Jumanji, when it pops out, a flower pops out, and the little girl's like, "Oh, it's so pretty," and then it's, you know, deadly. But that's kind of where my brain went with this, and it sounds like it's obviously a significant issue and a significant threat to your guys' economic prosperity out here. I was curious about what it would take for that. I believe you said approximately 200 acres of gorse that is right in the central corridor of the city, and how you're having zoning issues because you can't develop on top of that. What would it take for that to get shifted or changed or rezoned?
Okay. Well, part of the complication of that is that the donut hole was subdivided back over 100 years ago when people living here at the time thought that Bandon was going to become San Francisco North. And so it's been subdivided into these tiny little potential row homes. And there's over 150 different owners in that 225 acres. And a high percent of those owners are trusts, family trusts, because they no longer live here. So reaching out and talking to those people is really tough. A huge percent of them don't even live here anymore. And we can't go in and remove gorse without the permission of the landowner. So we're working with trying to find enough homeowners to jump on board with us and try to form a Firewise community there. But it's proven to be really difficult. We're also, the city and the county are in conversations about steps the county may be able to take to force better control of gorse in unincorporated Coos County.
Well, hopefully, the conversations, obviously with the regional solutions teams and the department, continues on in a positive fashion to try to figure out ways to address these issues. Obviously, that seems like it's been a problem that's been going on for almost a century. And so I would be interested in learning more, at least a follow-up in terms of how you guys are thinking about it proactively with the other sister agencies, of ways to address this for the future.
A suggestion, you can learn a lot about it from Caddy McEwen. Her husband's great-grandfather was Lord Bennett, who brought that damn stuff over here. And that's why she's agreed to be a co-convener of the Gorse Action Group for Oregon Solutions.
Thank you very much for your comments, your presentation. I think obviously you're raising a very important issue that I was candidly unaware of. I guess I have a question for the director, and that is, what is the current status of our relationship, ODOT's relationship with the Invasive Species Council, if any?
I don't think there is a formal relationship. I think it's probably the relationship you see here, just various partners that work within an area that has been overcome by this invasive plant, just sitting down around the table. So I think, again, if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, the council itself is probably legislated, has a membership, and I think what I heard is a potential legislative conversation that will expand that membership. Obviously, if that is the case, and it moves forward, we would sit at the table and bring the resources and the collective wisdom of this agency to help inform.
I do know that you don't have to be legislatively appointed. You could become an ex officio member without the legislator directing it, so it would be possible for ODOT to have a seat at the table without legislative action.
I think that's fair, but we are a creature of authorities. I like authorities to bend back to, so.
Well, at any rate, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations on working at a great place.
I love it.
And with that, I believe our 7 items on the agenda for today are fulfilled. And it's been a great trip down here to Southern Region 4, and very beautiful out. So I would hate to be the one in the way of everybody else getting out and being able to engage themselves in the ambiance of this beautiful weather outside. So with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.